creaking, as if someone was moving furniture in the middle of the night. It created an air of mystery that gradually began to unsettle me. Every time I heard those sounds, I felt the urge to check what was happening, but common sense told me it was best not to interfere. One evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed that his door was slightly ajar. A dim light flickered inside. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. Then I pushed it open a little further and stepped inside. The interior was dark and damp, like a basement, even though it was just a regular apartment. A strange smell hung in the air, a mixture of old paper, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. The apartment looked unusual. Old black and white photographs of unfamiliar people hung on the walls. Newspaper clippings with headlines like "Missing Person" and "Police Still Searching for Answers" were scattered across the table. The sheer number of these materials was overwhelming, as if someone had been studying these cases for years. Candles were arranged on the floor, and in the center of the room stood a chair with something resembling a rope. It looked like a place for some sort of ritual or evidence of someone being restrained. My heartbeat quickened as I realized that something deeply disturbing was happening in this apartment. I was about to leave when I heard a rustling sound behind me. Turning around, I saw a dark figure in the corner of the room. In the dim light, a pair of eyes watched me intently. At that moment, an overwhelming urge to run gripped me, but my legs wouldn't move. Cold sweat trickled down my back, and my fingers trembled slightly. My mind struggled to find a logical explanation for what was happening, but fear was the only thing dominating my thoughts. Summoning all my strength, I took a sudden step toward the exit. In doing so, I accidentally knocked over the table, sending newspaper clippings scattering across the floor. One of them landed right in front of me, and I recognized the face in the photograph. It was my neighbor, but not as he appeared now, exhausted and hollow-eyed. In the picture, he looked younger, smiling. The headline beneath the photo described a missing man who was last seen in this very building. None of it made sense. I realized that the man I had thought of as my strange neighbor might not be who he claimed to be. Feeling the urgency to escape, I bolted for the door, ignoring the furniture and objects falling around me. As I rushed out of the apartment, I slammed the door shut behind me and quickly locked myself inside my own unit. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound seemed suspicious, and I listened carefully to every rustle beyond my door. The next day, I decided to contact the police. When the authorities came to inspect my neighbor's apartment, it was empty. No photographs, no newspaper clippings, just bare walls and an eerie sense that someone was watching me from the darkness. They said there was no evidence of any crime and assured me that I might have imagined everything due to exhaustion or stress. But I knew what I had seen was real. It couldn't have been a mere hallucination. After that day, I never saw my neighbor again. He disappeared as if he had never been there. But every night, as I lie in bed, I get the unsettling feeling that someone is standing just beyond my door, silently watching me. After that incident, I started noticing small details that made me question the reality of what had happened. Every time I passed by his empty apartment, it seemed like the door was slightly ajar, as if someone was watching from inside. But the moment I turned my head, it was tightly shut. A few days later, a note appeared under my door. The handwriting was sharp but unsteady, and the words sent a chill through me. That same musty scent of mold and old paper from my neighbor's apartment filled the air again. But the worst came at night. Waking up in the middle of the night, I noticed that all my closets were open and the furniture had shifted slightly. On the wall opposite my bed, a message written in black marker stood out clearly. There was no doubt I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. I rushed to the door, trying to escape, but the handle wouldn't budge. The lock wasn't just closed. It felt as if someone had sealed it from the other side. My heart pounded as a familiar rustling sound came from behind me. The reflection in the mirror revealed a dark figure slowly approaching. With the last bit of strength, I grabbed the nearest object and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered into tiny shards, and at that very moment, the lights in the apartment flickered back on. The figure was gone, breathing heavily I struggled to process what had just happened. I left the apartment that night and never returned. The next day, I moved out for good. But even now, far from that building, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, catching a whiff of mold and old paper. And in the darkness, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me from the slightly open closet door. I've always had a passion for old maps. It was my secret hobby, collecting maps from different eras from all over the world. I even found a few rare pieces marked with forgotten places that no one remembered. But once I stumbled upon a map that changed everything. At first glance, it didn't stand out from the rest of my collection. But when I examined it closely, I noticed something strange. There was an island marked on it that didn't exist on any modern maps. Its location was deep in the southern part of the ocean, where there shouldn't be anything, according to all geographical records. I thought it might have been some mistake by an ancient cartographer or a forgery, but something inside me urged me to check it out. I began searching for more information about this island, and to my surprise, I found several old records mentioning it. The island was called Sea of Darkness, and according to the legends, no one lived there, but people who tried to get close to it never returned. There is a story about a ship that vanished in these waters over 100 years ago, and its captain, in his last letter, mentioned strange sounds coming from the island, almost as if they were rising from the island itself. It was so fascinating that I couldn't ignore it. I started delving into old maps and records about the island. All of them ended the same way, with ominous warnings to stay far away from the place. But the more I studied, the more I felt drawn to it. The unknown island, where no human foot had ever stepped, where darkness still reigned, stirred something in me, not fear, but curiosity. I decided to go, and, as it often happens, I ignored the warnings of others. I gathered everything I need for the trip and set off in search of the island that didn't exist on any map. The journey was long and difficult, but eventually I arrived at the spot where, according to my calculations, the island should be. There was nothing in sight, just the dark, endless ocean swallowing everything around me. I stopped my boat some distance from where the island should have been. The wind died down, and the silence was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I decided to head to the shore. The moment I set foot on land, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. The air was heavy and unlike anything I'd felt on the other islands I'd visited. The trees were black, and the grass had an unnatural gray tint to it. Everything around me looked as if it had been swallowed by some dark cloud. My hand instinctively reached for my compass, but it didn't work. Only dead silence. I began walking forward, but the further I went, the more I felt like someone or something was watching me. At first, I tried to dismiss it as the wind or animals, but when I looked up, I saw a shadow. It moved quickly, and it wasn't just one shadow. There were several. They were closing in. My first thought was, I need to run. But it wasn't just normal fear. It was something deeper, a phobia that gripped my entire body. Every step I took, I felt like I was moving forward, but my hands wouldn't obey. The further I went, the more I felt like I was getting lost. The path started twisting in ways that didn't make sense. And then I saw it, a huge stone with strange carvings on it. It seemed ancient, and yet there was something unsettling about it. The symbols were unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was as if the stone was marking a place that didn't belong in this world. I was about to turn back when I heard a noise. A soft whisper, almost like a breath on the wind, but it wasn't from the wind. I looked around but saw nothing. The silence was too thick, too suffocating. It felt like the island was alive, watching, waiting. I tried to make my way back, but it was impossible. The path had vanished, and I was surrounded by endless shadows. And then the whisper came again. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a voice. It was low, growling, almost like something alive was speaking to me from the depths of the earth. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone. The longer I stayed, the more it felt like the island was changing me. The darkness was creeping into my thoughts, clouding my mind, pushing me to do things I couldn't understand. I could hear footsteps behind me now, though when I turned, No one was there. The shadows grew closer, and in the distance, I thought I saw something moving. But it wasn't human. Then, I heard my name. It wasn't from anyone I knew, but it was unmistakable. My name was spoken in a voice that was not human, and it sent chills through my body. I tried to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. The shadows were everywhere now, closing in from all directions. The voices grew louder, surrounding me. I felt like I was drowning in them. I couldn't escape. The island had claimed me. Now, I sit in the darkness, with no compass, no map, and no way to leave. The island has taken me, just as it did with others before me. And I hear the whispers again, getting closer, growing stronger. It's only a matter of time before they claim me fully. I don't know why I agreed to go. It was just a regular letter without a signature, which looked like spam or another attempt to grab attention. But there was something in it that made me act. The letter began simply, "Come to the farm on the outskirts. There's a mechanism that needs to be stopped. If you don't, many people will be harmed." There were no explanations, no specifics, but I felt it wasn't just a hoax. I don't usually believe in superstitions or mystical events, but this time something felt off. My hand instinctively reached for my phone to find out where this farm was. The address was familiar. It was an old, abandoned area that had a reputation for being a place you didn't linger longer than necessary. For the first time, I wondered if it was really worth going. But some voice in my head urged me to move forward. I didn't know what I was about to face, but I felt like I was walking towards something important. As I got closer, I began to feel an odd sense of anxiety. There was no sign of life around, just silence, which seemed deeper than usual. My heart tightened as I approached the entrance to the farm. The old building looked abandoned, yet its silhouette stood out against the setting sun. If I didn't know where I was, I might have walked past it, but now I was here. I stepped inside and heard nothing but my own footsteps echoing off the walls. At first glance, the farm seemed empty, but the deeper I went, the more I felt that something was wrong. On the tables, shelves, and floors were old tools, rusted pieces of machinery left behind from another time. But something looked strange, something new. At the end of one of the rooms stood a massive mechanism that appeared to have been recently installed. It was a complex piece, unlike anything I'd seen before, with huge gears, wires, metal plates, and spools that seemed capable of lifting the earth. The more I approached it, the stronger I felt something powerful. I couldn't understand why. The mechanism looked like part of some unfinished project, but all I felt when I looked at it was fear. My hand was so close to it that I could feel the cold metal. I felt immense tension, but I still didn't touch it. The mechanism suddenly sprang to life. At first, I thought I had accidentally triggered it, but as the sounds of creaking and buzzing filled the air, I realized something was wrong. The gears began to move, the spools started working, and the metal plates began to tremble. I couldn't comprehend what was happening, but everything started to resemble a living creature gaining strength. Then, I heard sounds coming from another room. Looking through the door, I saw a shadow. It moved quickly, and it seemed like there were not one, but several shadows. They were closing in. My first thought was, I have to run. But it wasn't just normal fear. It was a phobia that permeated my entire body. I felt like every step I took was moving me forward, but my hands wouldn't obey. The closer I got to the machine, the more I realized I had to stop it. Its pulsing was getting more intense. I couldn't even imagine what would happen if it kept going. If I did nothing, everything around me would begin to fall apart. I turned back to the machine to find a way to shut it down, but then I realized that the mechanism was designed in such a way that it didn't have an off switch. I kept searching for a way to stop it, and the more I looked, the more I felt that it couldn't be done so simply. And then, in one moment when I felt like I had reached the limit of my strength, I noticed one of the wires. It pulsed, almost like it was alive, as if waiting for me to touch it. I realized this wire was the key. What would happen once I disconnected it? I couldn't imagine, but there was no other choice. I placed my hand on the wire and felt its energy surge into my fingers. In an instant, I felt a sharp pain, but I didn't let go. The mechanism responded. All the sounds abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was so deep, I couldn't find peace in it. Something had happened, but what exactly, I couldn't understand. From that moment, everything changed. I didn't know what had happened to the place, to the machine, or to the people around me. But one thing was certain. I felt that my life would never be the same again. Whether I had become part of something much larger and unknown, or if I was just a part of an experiment, I couldn't say. It wasn't just stopping the mechanism. It was something much bigger. And now, when I look back, I realize what I did may have been just the beginning of something terrifying that I still don't fully understand.